Hey y'all, this is a short video that will introduce you to Everything is Illuminated. We're covering the film this week and also the first 85 pages of the novel, or if you're using a digital version, read through the chapter titled Falling in Love, 1791 to 1803. So the novel version of Everything is Illuminated was published in 2002, and then the film version came out pretty quickly thereafter in 2005. The novel is written by an American novelist named Jonathan Safran Foer, who's the author of Everything is Illuminated, Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, Eating Animals, a bunch of other texts, both fiction and nonfiction. He's won a lot of awards, but his fiction is polarizing. Some people don't care for his style. He's very playful, irreverent. So, you may enjoy his style or not. And then the film version in 2005 also won some awards, and it's got a really inventive, interesting score. It's a beautiful film that shows off some of Ukraine's countryside. We'll talk about Ukraine in just a minute, but that's a little bit on the history of the text and the film. I do want to start off with a warning about the film that it contains a depiction of self-harm. The scene appears in the film from right around an hour and 15 seconds in and stops in an hour 33 and 40 seconds, and then it returns to that scene very briefly from 137:40 to 138:15. If you'd rather not see that, I understand. It's an important scene for the development of the character and the resolution of the film. But if you wanted to skip from 131:15 to 138:15, you can still figure out what has happened if you'd rather not see that. If that's the case, then I would suggest kind of reading a synopsis to see what you've missed, so that you don't miss that important part of the text. But I did want to make sure you're aware of that, and if you don't want to see it, understand completely. So the plot loosely follows a character named Jonathan Safran Foer, who is also the author of the text, although they're not necessarily the same person. One is a fictionalized representation, who travels to Ukraine looking for his family history. Now, Jonathan Safran Foer, the real person, the novelist, did this right after he graduated college, and part of that research did end up in this novel. Although this isn't a strictly historical novel, it bends the history, it makes things up to suit the narrative. When the character Jonathan Safran Foer gets to Ukraine, he hires Heritage Tours to track down a woman called Augustine, the woman who saved Jonathan's grandfather, or a man called Safran, with whom he shares a deep and uncanny resemblance, which you can see from the image in the film. And throughout this journey, each of the main characters, you can kind of see the younger Alex to the left, Jonathan Safran Foer, played by Elijah Wood, in the middle, and then the grandfather, Alex, on the right. Each of those people learn something about family, about himself, about his place in the history of Ukraine, and also in the fallout of World War II. Sammy Davis Jr. maybe doesn't learn anything, although that would make for an interesting paper. As you read the novel, though, you'll recognize that this is actually two intertwined stories. We have the historical novel of Trachimbrod, written by Jonathan. This is the part that takes place in the 18th to the 19th century. These are chapters normally about dreams or something like that, something historical. Then you also have the contemporary novel that is written by Alex, which documents Jonathan's visits to the Ukraine. And you also have various letters from Alex to Jonathan, in which Alex talks about the revision process of writing his portion of the novel. So it's really playful in its form. If you find yourself confused about what's happening, that's no problem. It's normal. This is the sort of book that invites rereading. Jonathan's sections, the historical ones, are necessarily speculative. On page 76, for example, the narrator describes how he imagines his ancestor Broad, the girl rescued from the river in the 18th century, how she might look. We might think of both narrators as unreliable, in fact, but in very different ways. Jonathan is using his imagination to construct his family history. He can't access that history because the Nazis destroyed Trachimbrod and murdered all of the people who lived there, at least most of those people who lived there, except his grandfather and a woman named Lista, whom you'll meet in the film and in the book. Now there are only scattered collectors, such as Jonathan and Lista, who want to know about their family's history, but can't because of the intervention of the violence of World War II. Alex is untrustworthy, I think, for slightly different reasons. He's got this ultra-masculine persona, which means that he exaggerates many things, but he's also deeply vulnerable and discloses many of his vulnerabilities, his preoccupations about his brother, his father's abuse, his own feelings to Jonathan in the letters and in his portions of the novel. And whenever you see parentheses in one of Alex's chapters, those are usually areas in which he's being quite honest. So the structure of the novel, it's all about the same central story, but it's almost like Pulp Fiction-esque in trying to put it together in various ways. It's one of the hallmarks of what we call postmodernism. One of the reasons I chose this novel and film to do is because, well, I like it, and also because Ukraine is so much in the news now, and this may make us think more about Ukraine and its history. This is a map of Ukraine if you're unfamiliar, but it's right in between what we might call East and West, of course, from a Eurocentric vantage point. But it's right between modern-day Russia, which you can see here, and then Romania, Poland. If you keep going to the west, you get to Germany, France, the Low Countries, those sorts of things. So it has historically been a battleground country in World War II and in the contemporary scene. What you can see, Odessa, that's where Alex and his family live, and then Trachimbrad is near Lutsk. So it's over here in this category, in the northwest part of Ukraine, which is right next to Poland. This is an image from a magazine from 1939, right before Germany invaded Czechoslovakia, that sort of outlines what this author thought was going to happen in the war, which is what happened. So you see over here on the right, you've got Russia, symbolized by Stalin, one of the leaders then, Germany by Adolf Hitler. And here is Ukraine right in the middle. And you can see how as the war progresses, as Germany went to war with Russia, Ukraine was right in the middle of things. And in the aftermath of World War II, Ukraine's borders, boundaries changed. And some territory was taken from Russia, some from Poland, etc. And part of Russia's rationale for the current war is to retake parts of those areas, Crimea, etc. But you can see Kiev here, Odessa down here. So I bring this up because during World War II, once Ukraine was occupied by Germany, it was one of the areas that saw some of the worst atrocities of that period. Lots of different estimates, but the highest end estimate I've seen is that up to 1.5 million Jewish people died in Ukraine alone. That's out of 6 million plus total people of Jewish descent that were killed during the war. So it was a really violent place, and it's something that the novel is really interested in unpacking, is that history. And of course, this book being written in 2002 couldn't have anticipated what's happening now, but just some background and context for thinking about the novel and for thinking about Ukraine as a whole. In terms of its genre, one of the genres that informs this novel is Holocaust literature, right? And much literature concerning the Holocaust stresses how we have to continually bear witness to what happened. We don't want to forget what happened, particularly the scale of it, how it focused on one group of people, and how each generation needs to learn what happened and to understand it. We're getting to a point in history where the direct survivors of the Holocaust are reaching the end of their natural lives, many of them passing away. Just the other day, there was a anniversary of D-Day in which a few of the survivors of the D-Day expedition got together, two of whom were 100 years old. Right, so we're getting to that point where many of the direct survivors are facing the end of their lives, and these questions of how to remember the Holocaust are becoming really urgent. And the film and the novel, I think, through inventive characters and storytelling, offer one way to bear witness to the past, but in a new, surprising, perhaps engaging way that is told through a postmodernist lens. So on page 53, for example, Alex writes to Jonathan, "I know that you asked me not to alter the mistakes because they sound humorous." He's talking about his word choice, his bombastic style. And humorous is the only truthful way to tell a sad story, but I think that I will alter them. Please do not hate me. So I think one of the things that Jonathan Safran Foer is doing is to kind of think about what are the ranges of reactions we have to trauma. What are the things that happen when bad things happen, and how do we deal with not only the bad things that happen firsthand, but as that trauma is passed down generation to generation. And that's something that Holocaust literature has always done, taken a very serious thing and tried to think of ways that we can remember and keep dealing with it and keep coming back to it productively. Some of the major themes in the text are translation and the problems of communication, linguistic problems, and cultural problems. These are highlighted often in the Alex chapters, in which he's trying to communicate with his Russian-speaking grandfather, and Jonathan as an English speaker who does not speak much Russian. Also in Alex's purposefully colorful style, right, in which he chooses to take everyday phrases and kind of make them a little strange, right? Like when Sammy Davis Jr., depicted on your left, eats her own tail. It says masticates, for example. It kind of takes us out of our comfort zone. It kind of forces us to think what it's like to be a second language reader or speaker. Some other themes are like personal and collective histories, understanding ourselves and how we fit within the family and community, how we inherit trauma, grief, sadness, happiness, any other emotions from the people that have come before us, regret and how to get closure. We see this particularly through Alex's grandfather. History and place as an idea. We see this through Lista, the other collector, when she says, I am Trachtenbrod. And then, of course, trauma and violence, how both individual trauma and violence, family trauma and violence, which we see with Alex's father, his brother little Igor, even with Alex himself, and in the past with Alex's grandfather. A big part of the story is survivor's guilt and trauma. Each of these three men shown here deal with that in a different way, right? People who directly survived World War II, how do they deal with that? What's the weight of that guilt, the cost of that guilt? And also generational trauma, right? So even Jonathan Safran Foer, whose grandfather survived, deals with a different sort of survivor's guilt or survivor's trauma or generational trauma based on what had happened in World War II. So that's something that I think this novel is centrally interested in. And finally, as you watch and read, you might think about adaptation studies. As we transform one text into another medium, i.e. from novel into film, that process is called adaptation. So you might think about how the film adapts a novel by analyzing a few scenes from it that are related. For example, one of my favorite scenes is the potato scene. Why is everyone laughing at the end, right? For example, in the novel, Alex says that it wasn't until much in the posterior that I understood that each of us was laughing for a different reason, for our own reason, and that not one of us, and not one of those reasons had a thing to do with the potato. He then goes on to tell a touching and troubling story about little Igor. Why does this film differ from the book in this particular way? What purpose does the change serve? So you might look at a few scenes or one scene that you find particularly poignant and think about how it diverges, how it transforms what's in the original text of the novel, and make some sort of claim about why that's important. So anyway, I hope this short video has been helpful. Please let me know if I can answer any questions, and I hope you have a great day.